So hello everyone and welcome. We're delighted that you're able to join us today to talk about what it takes to successfully deploy a mobile app. But first, let's do some introductions. My name is Gabe Sumner and I'm a product marketing manager with Telerik. If you'd like to connect with me online, you can find me at Gabe Sumner on Twitter, and I'm always happy to get your feedback and questions. And also presenting with me today will be TJ Van Tol, who is a developer advocate with Telerik. And in just a few minutes, TJ will take us through several hands-on demos so we can actually see some of the ideas presented in this webinar in action. You can connect with TJ online at TJ Van Tol. And during the next hour, we're going to explore 7 steps that you can use to deploy a successful mobile app. This entire session is being recorded and will later be posted to Telerik's YouTube channel. We'll also post a link to the recording through our Twitter account, which you can find at Telerik. We'll also email you a link to the recording once it's online. So if you want to reference any of this later, you'll absolutely have an opportunity. You're also invited to ask us questions throughout this webinar using the on-screen interface or through Twitter. We'll be monitoring and answering questions throughout the webinar, and we'll do a live Q&A at the end. Now, before we start going through the 7 steps, I want to talk about what we mean when we say successful. A successful mobile app is an app that offers users an exceptional experience. Consider that today there are more mobile devices than desktop devices. Mobile is no longer optional, it's absolutely critical. But everyone realizes this at this stage, which is why there are well over 2 million apps in public app stores. At Google I/O this past year in May, Google announced 1 million apps in the Google Play Store. And then in December, Apple followed up with their own announcement. And I'm not even including in this count Windows Phone or Windows RT apps. The point here is that this number is already huge and will only get bigger in the months and years ahead. And what this means is that users have plenty of options when it comes to what apps they engage with. Competition has become absolutely fierce, and it's becoming harder and harder to stand out from the crowd. And at the same time, consumer apps continue to encroach into the enterprise. You've heard this phrase, the consumerization of IT. Through their personal devices and personal services, users have experienced a higher level of usability than in most cases they've ever encountered before in the enterprise. And as a result, normal people, not just the tech savvy, have become increasingly aware of what technology is capable of. And as a result, they become far less tolerant of bad or mediocre experiences. The fact is that good experiences encourage adoption. And more than just that, good experiences can disrupt entrenched competitors. We see examples like Dropbox, which is essentially just a file storage service. And this is certainly nothing new, but they've disrupted countless IT departments by simply offering a better experience than what users had access to. Similarly, bad experiences discourage adoption. They literally drive your users to seek alternatives. This is true when competing in public app stores, but it's just as true for inside enterprises. A successful mobile app is an app that offers users a great experience. So, okay, fine. But the question is, of course, how do you go about creating great user experiences? And I guess at this point, that's where I'm supposed to say, well, you just try the Telerik platform because that's all you need to create a great mobile app experience, right? But of course, that is not a truthful answer. There is no silver bullet solution for creating great mobile app experiences. It's not the result of magical ideas, it's not the result of hiring UX experts, and it's not the result of buying tools and services, even the Telerik platform. These things might help, but they are certainly no guarantee of success. Great experiences are the result of 2 very basic and very fundamental things: listening and adapting, and doing this in a continuous loop across the entire life cycle of the project, everything from design through to deployment and beyond. Which leads us to step 1, create a disposable implementation of your idea. At the beginning of your project, you don't have facts, you have assumptions, lots and lots of untested assumptions. Now, I know there are a lot of developers attending this webinar, and I completely understand that your impulse is to simply dive straight into code. But if you do this, you're bound to spend a lot of time building the wrong thing. Here's the deal. Code is time-consuming and expensive to create. It represents an investment. And as human beings, it's hard for us to walk away from something we've invested deeply in. At some point, avoiding the loss becomes a bigger motivator for us than chasing a gain. And this predisposition can keep us tethered to bad ideas, even if those ideas are causing us harm. We see this played out every day in casinos, but we can also see it in our own companies and in our own projects. It is painfully easy to fall into this trap. And at some point, we lose track of what's best for users, and instead we're just doubling down over and over again in an attempt to regain our losses. So we need to accept and acknowledge this weakness in ourselves. And to compensate, we need to guard ourselves against overcommitting to bad paths. And we'll do that through disposable iterations of our idea and our mobile app. And this word disposable is important. Disposability implies that it's trivial to acquire and absolutely painless to lose. It's this quality, particularly in the beginning stages, that makes it easy for us to pivot in new directions. So as it relates to mobile apps, what I'm talking about here is wireframes, mockups, and prototypes. Now these words often get used interchangeably, but they actually mean different things. Each differ in the level of fidelity and interactivity they contain. So wireframes are particularly useful in the beginning stages of a project. They can be created using nothing more than a whiteboard or a napkin and a pen. But there are also tools that enable us through a drag and drop library of shapes to quickly visualize our ideas. These representations aren't meant to be taken literally. They are simply a sketch, and they enable teams to visualize their ideas and then casually iterate. But here's the problem though. Because wireframes are low fidelity, they might be difficult to share with your users or project stakeholders that are outside the dev team. Wireframes require a lot of imagination and experience to interpret. And if you share them with the uninitiated, you're more likely to get feedback about like a logo missing or the lack of color rather than the interaction flow of the app. So in most cases, wireframes will be most useful within the development team as you kind of quickly iterate through a variety of ideas. But eventually, you're going to start feeling confident about the direction you're heading, and it's at that point that you'll need to validate your thinking with a larger audience. But before you can do that, you'll need to add some polish to the wireframe. Again, many people outside the dev team won't be able to interpret a conceptual sketch of the mobile app. So before they can relate to it like a real mobile app, it needs to look like a real mobile app. Now this is typically where you would get a designer involved. In most cases, they will use whatever design program they feel comfortable with, probably Photoshop, to make wireframes look real, thus turning a low fidelity wireframe into a high fidelity mock-up. And using these high fidelity representations, you can get much better feedback about the direction you're taking. However, although mock-ups for all intents and purposes look like the final result, they're little more than static images and thus non-interactive, which will again limit how much useful feedback you can get from users and other project stakeholders. To overcome this, we can layer interactivity onto our mockups, thus creating a prototype. Prototypes are high fidelity and interactive. They not only look like a real app, but they also behave like a real app. Using these prototypes, you can take a sampling of your users, let them interact with your ideas, and then get lots of useful feedback. Now, it's certainly possible to create prototypes using code, but as mentioned, the more time and effort you invest into any given path, the less likely you'll be to abandon that path, even if it's the wrong path. So our goal with each of these solutions, wireframes, mockups, and prototypes, is to keep our implementations disposable. What we're doing at this stage of the project is actively scouting for the right thing to build. And we're doing this by iterating through multiple disposable iterations inside a continuous loop of listening and adapting. So what I'm going to do now is turn this webinar over to TJ to actually show us some of these ideas in action inside the Telerik platform. So TJ, I'm passing control over to you.
Thanks, Gabe, and thanks to everyone that joined us today, because we have some really exciting stuff to talk about. Now, as Gabe said, my name is TJ Van Tol, and I work as a developer advocate for Telerik, and I'm here today to walk you through an end-to-end demo of the Telerik platform. Now, of course, to show an end-to-end demo, we have to actually build a functioning real app. So for the purposes of our demo today, we're going to assume a hypothetical scenario. Let's say we're a company that does client work and we get a call from a restaurant chain named Kendo Sushi. Now, Kendo Sushi has a few dozen locations throughout the country, and they're primarily interested in an app that lets customers easily find their locations. Now, as Gabe mentioned, as a developer, my tendency at this point is to jump directly into the code. I've seen my fair share of locations listings, and I have a sense in my head of how I think it should work. But Gabe has convinced me to give the wireframing and prototyping approach a chance, so I'm going to start there instead. And to do so, I'm going to use one of the Telerik platform's new tools, App Prototyper. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my browser so that you can actually see this in action. And in my browser, you can see that I'm within the Telerik platform, so platform.telerik.com. A few minutes ago, I created a workspace named Kendo Sushi Work, and within this workspace, you can see I have the option to create instances of the various project types that the Telerik platform provides. Now, we'll go over each of these today, but we're going to start with this one down here for App Prototyper. Now, App Prototyper is a tool that lets you build everything from lightweight wireframes to more high-fidelity interactive prototypes. You can build for various screen sizes, as you can see here, but since we're primarily concentrating on mobile today, we'll go ahead and use a phone screen, and we'll also take the default iPhone 5 display. So I'm going to go ahead and create this project with a name of Sushi Prototype, and leave the description blank for now. In App Prototyper, you build prototypes by creating screens, and there are two ways you can do so. You can upload existing images, so PNGs or JPEGs or even Photoshop documents, or you can start with a completely blank canvas. And since we're starting lightweight here, we'll go ahead and start with a blank screen. Now remember that this chain was most interested in a location listing. So for a first version of this app, let's just build two simple screens. We'll have a home screen with some introductory text, and we'll also have a location listing. And we'll limit our example to just that to keep this demo digestible. We only have an hour together here. So we have to give this new screen a name, so we'll say the home screen, create that, and click this to go ahead and get started. Within the prototyper, this toolbar on the left has a variety of shapes and controls that you can use to build up your wireframes, including iOS and Android looking controls, things like form controls and buttons, tab bars, things like that. Now the way App Prototyper works is you can take these controls on the left and drag them onto the canvas. So for instance, maybe I want a tab bar to use as my navigation down here. Maybe throw a status bar on the top. I could throw together maybe the refresh button to show that this is loading. And you can take this approach to build up an entire UI. Now, since I'm guessing you have better things to do today than to watch me drag shapes around a screen, I'm going to go ahead and switch to a version of this app that I worked on earlier. Here I have a slightly more polished version of the home screen created, and I also created a simple version of the location screen. Now all this was done by dragging controls from this left toolbar and onto this canvas. And the images, for instance, were done using this Images tab, which lets me upload arbitrary images from my hard drive. So I have two screens, but I want to make this feel like an actual app. I want this to be interactive. And that's where this link button up here comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and use this lasso to select this home screen in the tab bar and tell App Prototyper that I want this to link to the home screen. I'll save that, switch over to the home screen, and I'm going to make the exact same change on the home screen, but this time make it link to the location screen. So I'll select that and select locations and go ahead and save. Now that we have this linked in place, let's see how they actually work. And we'll do that using this preview button up here. This opens a new tab that shows our wireframe in action. The links that we set up are actually active. So if I click the Locations tab here, I actually go to the location screen. And the same thing with the Home tab as well. Now the cool thing about App Prototyper is I can now actually share this wireframe with anyone. If I click the share button there, I get a publicly accessible URL that anyone can view. So you don't even need a Telerik or Telerik platform account to view it. Now at this point, I'm not really ready to share this very rough wireframe with a client. This is still a little messy, but I might want to share it with my team members. Maybe my company has a UX or a UI specialist that I could brainstorm with. And to make this brainstorming even easier, App Prototyper has commenting functionality that's built right into the tool. So for instance, suppose I'm one of my team members and I'm over on the location screen here and I notice something. So I can click this comment button, click the spot on the screen where I have a comment about, and add the comment. For instance, I might notice that, hey, since I'm on a mobile device, we could actually use the device's GPS to tell the user how far away they are from each location. And once this comment is in place, we can go ahead and discuss this back and forth. So I can comment on it and say, okay, I think that's a good idea, and respond to them. If I make the change, I can go ahead and mark this comment as resolved, which displays it grayed out like this. And if I no longer need this comment anymore, I can always delete it to clean up the canvas as well. And this is pretty lightweight, but we can use this to iterate and get a good idea of how this app should work. And you can do all this before you start with the more time-consuming process of actually coding this and making this a real live functioning app. But after some initial brainstorming, at this point, you might actually want to involve designers and build something that actually feels a little more real. Something that you could show to a client, for instance. Now I want to show this, so I actually threw together a higher fidelity prototype of this project right within the same Telerik platform project, and that's what you're looking at here. Now, these 4 screens are images that I uploaded from my hard drive directly into App Prototyper. Now, if I go into one of them, show that I also added the same links that we saw earlier to make this prototype interactive. For instance, this location screen links to the location screen the screen that I uploaded. And I did one more thing as well, and to show that, let's preview this. So remember that the feedback was that it would be nice if this location screen actually showed the distance away from the user's location. And on a mobile device, the operating system actually prompts you to give permission to get that location. So I mocked that out directly within the App Prototyper tool. And I even have these buttons interactive as well. So if I say OK, I see a location listing that displays the distance away. But if I go back through the process and click that I do not want to allow my location, I see the same location listing screen, but this time without any distances. And all the same sharing and commenting tooling still applies. So I can send this prototype to my team, or really even a client at this point, and gather feedback. And what's cool is that all of this happens before we had to write a single line of code. So by wireframing and prototyping, by the time we get to the coding process, we already have a pretty good idea of what we want the app to look like and how it should behave. Now, of course, when we do get to that point, we do actually still have to code this app, and the Telerik platform gives us the tools that you need to do that. So to talk about that, I'm going to toss it back to Gabe to discuss what comes next. Gabe?
Thanks, TJ. So TJ just showed us how we can use the Telerik platform to iterate through disposable implementations of our ideas. And here's the best part. Once we have a working prototype, the prototype itself can act as a design specification for the development team, which leads us to our next step, building the actual mobile app. Now, as we're building the mobile app, it's still important that we continuously listen and adapt through a series of rapid iterations. And to do that, we need a development process that lets us immediately experience the impact of what we're doing. There is a natural rhythm to coding. You'll write some code and then you'll run it to see what it does. What we're seeing here is a relationship between action and result. Doing something and then experiencing the impact of what you've done. And the faster this wheel spins, the more productive you'll be. Consider the alternative. Back in the day, software was encoded onto punch cards. Programmers would spend hours, maybe even days, meticulously inscribing their instructions onto these punch cards. They would then schedule some time with the computer, feed their punch cards into a slot, and wait several minutes, watch the computer churn, and eventually get back a result. Maybe it would be the result they expected, maybe not. And if they didn't get the result they were expecting, they would go back to the drawing board and do the whole process over again. Now just imagine how much time this workflow would add to any given project. The point here is that as the distance between action and result grows, development slows down. And believe it or not, this is very relevant to mobile programming, and here's why. When we're developing for mobile, we're potentially dealing with a lot of different devices and a lot of different form factors. iOS, Android, different versions of Android, Windows phones, smartphones, tablets. And this makes it very hard for developers to readily experience the impact of the code they've just written. So mobile has essentially resurrected an old problem by inserting distance between action and result. And a successful mobile development process needs to bridge this gap by making you immediately aware of the impact your code is having across all the devices you support. And ideally, this would even be done in the context of the development tools you're already using, rather than forcing you to abandon everything you're already doing and then use something new. Now, even as we're building the app, we're still listening and adapting and iterating. And as we do this, it's important to stay focused on your users and the problem you're solving, which means we need to avoid becoming overly distracted by technical hurdles, not the least of which is the infrastructure that powers our app. And sadly, there are a lot of technical distractions to be had here. Data services, web service APIs, push notification services, authentication services, not to mention the services that support your development process. And all of these come with their own associated SDKs to learn. And it's really easy to fall down the rabbit hole on this stuff and lose weeks of productivity. Now, it is worth your while to at least investigate mobile application development platforms that provide integrated cloud-based services that you can easily consume or not consume based on your app's requirements. And then once you've built a feature that's proven successful with users, then you'll want to preserve it by using automation to protect your gains. It's inevitable that as software evolves, things unintentionally break. It happens. We take one step forward and then we take 3 steps back. And as we've already talked about, in mobile development, it can be extremely difficult to fully understand the impact of the new code you've just created since we're dealing with so many different devices. So to help guard against this, we can use automated functional testing. This enables us to essentially record a given activity like logging in and then play it back continuously on a variety of devices as our app evolves to ensure that the feature never breaks. This makes us immediately aware when we've negatively impacted an existing experience. Okay, so these last 3 steps that we've just gone through relate to building or coding our mobile app. And now I'm going to turn this back over to TJ to show us these ideas in action. TJ?
Okay, we've went through the prototyping process, and now we're ready to actually build something. And to do so, we're going to use the Telerik platform tool for building hybrid mobile applications, App Builder. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term hybrid, it basically means an app that is written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that gets deployed to devices as native iOS, Android, and Windows Phone apps. And personally, I like to think of App Builder as a series of tools that make hybrid development easy. Now, there are a number of ways you can use App Builder, including an in-browser client, a dedicated Windows client, an extension for Visual Studio, but personally I happen to be an avid Sublime Text user, so I'm going to stick with Sublime Text for the purposes of this demo. But know that everything I'm going to show today also works in each of these other editors. Using App Builder and Sublime Text goes hand in hand with the App Builder CLI, so I'm going to switch to my terminal to show this. The CLI is available on npm, and you can get it by running npm install -g App Builder. Now, since I already have App Builder installed, I can run App Builder to get a list of the commands available. Now, there's quite a few commands here, but they're all fairly straightforward. For instance, I can use App Builder create to scaffold out a new project for us. So if I run App Builder create sushi, for instance, this creates a new project named sushi in a sushi directory. You can see that it builds the full file structure for us. To save us some time, I've taken this boilerplate and made some small changes to suit the Kendo Sushi app. So I'm going to switch to that now and open it in Sublime Text. If I open the index.html file, you can see that this is a Kendo UI mobile application. And the way Kendo UI mobile applications are structured are into views. And here I have 4 views that correspond to the 4 views that were on our prototype. So I have the home view here, and then I have 3 empty views for the other spots on the tab bar. And then the tab bar navigation is defined down here in the footer. This is great, but you probably want to see what this actually looks like on a device. It's kind of hard to get a sense of what this is doing just by looking at some HTML code. App Builder provides a few utilities to do just that. And I'm going to start by showing the App Builder companion app. So I'm going to do that by dragging my iOS device, which is my iPhone, over here onto the screen. Now, the companion app is an app that you install on your device, and you can see the iOS one on my iPhone here. To get the code here onto my device, I'm going to go back to the command line, go into my app directory, then I'll run app builder, say do iOS build, and pass the companion option to tell app builder I want to do a build that runs on the companion app. This will give me a QR code that I can scan directly within the companion app. So if I bring the app up here, start up the QR scanner and scan this code, the project actually appears on my iOS device. Here's the home screen and the other 3 screens that are currently blank. The companion app makes it trivial to view your application on a device, but it actually gets way cooler. Let's say I want to make a change, maybe update this title on the home screen. So I'm going to go back to my Sublime Text, see my code here, and I'll find the text that corresponds with that title, which is right here. I'll make this change. Let's say I want to get more excited about the title here and add an exclamation part. And I'll go back to the command line, and this time I'll say app builder livesync iOS and tell it that I'm dealing with the companion app. When I do that, watch the title here, and you can see that that change is automatically reflected on the app on the device. But we can do even better. I'm going to actually take my Android device, which I have over here, and on my Android device I've already set up the companion app and I've already loaded the Kendo Sushi app onto it. And what I'm going to do is use the same live sync but set it up as a watcher. So for iOS, I'll run the same App Builder Live Sync iOS, but this time pass the watch option as well. Then I'll run the same thing, but this time for Android. Now, when I make a change to this app, I'll have to drag these side by side. Maybe I get way more excited about the title. And save this file. Watch both devices automatically update to get this change. You can see the exclamation points got a little bit cut off on my iOS device. I can make another change to get rid of them. And watch those both update as well. I love the live sync functionality that App Builder provides because it basically takes the F5 or refresh functionality that we love from the web and brings it to mobile apps. Now, there are some limitations to the companion apps. You can't test things like your app's icons with it. There are also some project configuration, things like permissions. For that, you need to do a true native build. And we'll get back to how to do that with App Builder in a few minutes. But for now, I'm going to clear a few things out of our way, including these simulators, and I'll also end these watchers that we have going on here. Because next I want to talk about how we can implement this location listing that Kendo Sushi was looking for. And to do so, we have to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question. Where are we going to put the data to drive this location listing? Mobile apps have made us think about this problem a little differently. There is no traditional backend like we've grown accustomed to in languages like PHP, .NET, Java, and so forth. Instead, you must expose any service that you want to use over HTTP, so your mobile app has access to it. The Telerik platform doesn't force you to put your data anywhere. You're free to use any existing infrastructure you have in place. But the platform does offer a backend services solution, which offers everything from a database in the cloud, which we could use to store and retrieve locations here, to more complex behavior, things like user management and even push notifications. And for the purposes of today's demo, that's exactly what we'll use. Now, earlier today, I set up a backend services project for this app in the Telerik platform, and that's what you're seeing here. When I open it up, you can see on the left-hand side all the various things you can do with backend services. So store files, user management, push notifications, send emails, things like that. But for today, all we're interested in is this types option. You can think of types sort of like tables in a more traditional relational database. When you create a content type, you can give it fields that you can kind of think of as columns and configure their types. You can store everything from dates and times, numbers, files, and things like that. In this case, I've already added the locations as a stores content type within this backend services project. You can see that for each store I've configured an address, and if I click on an individual one here, I've also added each location's geographical information here as well. So this is our data, but what makes Telerik Backend Services really useful is it provides SDKs that make manipulating and accessing this data really seamless. There are SDKs for multiple environments, .NET, Android, iOS, and so forth, so you can even work with the same data across multiple platforms. Now, for our mobile app, we're interested in the JavaScript SDK, which you can grab from this downloads link in the upper right-hand corner. For now, let's head back to our code, and I'm going to go ahead and expand this. For this project, I've already added the Backend Services JavaScript SDK, which is called Everlive, and placed it in this project script directory. I also have two custom scripts for this project as well, app.js and locations.js. And if I go into the app.js file, you'll see this line here, which instantiates an instance of the backend services with the project's API key that I can actually retrieve from right here. And in this case, I'm storing it in a global EL variable because I'm going to need it later when we actually get the locations from backend services. And this is the only line of code I need to initialize the services to get it ready to use. Now, if I go back to the index.html file, I have this other script for locations, and this is what we're going to use to load the locations from backend services. But first I have to make one change to the HTML here. I'm going to take this locations view and add a little more HTML. What I'm adding here is just a basic unordered list that'll store the locations and a Kendo template that controls how each of these locations is going to look. If you remember from our prototype, we're going to try to get the distance from the user, and if we have it, we're going to display it, and if not, it just won't be there. If we hop over to the locations file, we'll see the implementation to actually grab these locations. Now, I've set it up here so this load function will be called as soon as the locations view is shown on the screen. Now, the call here for navigator geolocation gets current position is actually a Cordova API, which gives me access to the native APIs on the device that I happen to be running on. So in this case, it's going to prompt the user for access to their GPS. And I pass get current positions two arguments, a success and an error callback. Now, the success callback will be called if the user gives permission and we're actually able to retrieve the GPS coordinates. And this position argument will actually have that data, and you can see that I'm pulling off the latitude and longitude here. The error callback is called if we don't get permissions for the user or if we can't get their GPS signal for whatever reason. And in this case, I'm just hard coding a value that represents Manhattan. You could implement this different ways. You might have a search box or some different way of doing this, but for simplicity now, we're just going to go with some hard-coded values. In either case, we call this getStores function, and this is where the backend services comes in. You can see that there's only a few lines of code needed to make this happen. What we do is remember that we set up this EL global variable as a reference to our backend services instance. And we tell it that we're dealing with stores, and then we create this query. The real magic happens in this near sphere call. This is actually built right into backend services, and it's a way of finding locations that are near a given latitude and longitude. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm telling backend services the user's latitude and longitude, which will either be the one they provided or that hard-coded value. Then I called the get function to actually go and retrieve those values. And this is where the magic happens. This is where we actually do an HTTP GET request to go get those values from this online database that we have set up. When it completes, we call this template stores function, which will actually take that template, apply it, and place the locations into that list so the user can see them. To see what this actually looks like, I'm going to save my index.html file, and let's go back to my iOS device. And this time we're going to perform a true iOS build. And for that, I'm actually going to use the App Builder Sublime package, which if you don't have, you can get from Sublime's package control. The App Builder Sublime package integrates a few pieces of the CLI directly into Sublime text. For instance, to deploy this app to my iOS device, all I need to do is select Tools, App Builder, Build and Deploy. Now, you can see that it's retrieving the devices, it's figuring out which devices I have connected. Now, while this is going on, watch this area of the screen for this application to appear. What's happening is App Builder is performing an iOS build of this app in the cloud. When that build finishes, App Builder will automatically download it to my Mac and then automatically install it on my iOS device. And there it is there. Now, there is one caveat I have to mention. While App Builder takes the pain of managing your own SDKs and builds away from you, for iOS you still need to be a member of the iOS developer program and you still have to generate provisioning profiles with Apple in order to deploy apps to iOS devices. And since Apple doesn't provide any APIs to do this, you have to go through the processes on Apple's website. Now, we do offer thorough documentation that can walk you through this process from start to finish if you head to the Telerik Platform's documentation site, but you do actually have to go through the entire process of joining the developer program and registering your device and configuring provisioning profiles in order to get these apps on devices. Now, I already have my provisioning profile set up, so for me, it was as easy as running the build and deploy and seeing the app on my device. And so I'm going to go ahead and run the app actually. If I go to the location screen, you'll see the prompt that we were expecting asking for GPS. And when I accept it, you'll see the locations list appear. And we're automatically getting those distances that we are away from my current location. I'm standing here right now in Lansing, Michigan, so I see the Lansing location here pop to the top. And if I scroll down, I'll see locations that are nowhere near me, places like Austin, Texas, and Miami, Florida. Now, remember the live sync functionality that I showed earlier? Well, that same functionality is available here, even though this is a built native application. And you can actually do a live sync directly from within Sublime Text. So let's go back to the title of this app, and this time say we want it to be red, for whatever reason. Can make this change, save it. Now if I head back up to the App Builder menu, I can pick to live sync this application. You can see that it's syncing it, and the change will appear live on my device. I can also configure Sublime to live sync my changes on save. So if I go back to this last menu option and pick live sync on save, and maybe I decide I want this to be blue text as well, save that, and now I have blue text. Let's take a step back and talk about what we just did, because there are two things that just happened that are pretty cool. The first is how easy building that location listing was. If you think about it, we didn't have to spin up a database and a server or build an API to manage locations. All we did was add the data to an online database and write a few lines of code to access it. And this approach is way more flexible as well. We could easily use the backend services SDKs to build an administration screen that the restaurant could use to manage this data. The CRUD APIs that you need to add, update, and remove existing locations are already available and built for you. The other piece of awesome is App Builder's Live Sync, because as I said, it basically takes the F5 ability from the web to mobile apps. And with a Sublime integration, it's as easy as clicking a menu option to see your changes live, even on built mobile applications. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and we have the functionality that we wanted for the first version of this mobile app. But before we show this to the client or internal testers, I want to add one more thing to this app, and that's some automated tests. And we can do that with another part of the Telerik platform, Telerik Mobile Testing. In the desktop and web worlds, there are already very well established unit and functional testing solutions, but not so much for mobile apps. And that's the problem that Telerik Mobile Testing is trying to solve. Automated testing for native iOS, Android, and Windows Phone apps. And I want to give a brief demo of how to use it. There are two parts to Telerik Mobile Testing. The first is a messaging server, which you can download from the Telerik platform and install. Now, I already have it installed, so I'm going to start that messaging server by running tm test server. The other half of mobile testing are the clients, or the actual devices. And this time I'm going to bring my Android device back up on the screen here. And there we go. Now, mobile testing has client apps for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, and you can see the mobile testing icon on my home screen right here. I'm going to start that up. Now, I've already told this client the IP address and port the messaging server is running on, so I can just click this big connect button to connect it. And now that we're connected, let's look at how to write the tests themselves. Now, I've already created a very simple setup to show how a basic test works, and I'm going to open that now. If you've written unit or functional tests before, this code will probably look relatively familiar. At the bottom here, there we go, I've defined a single test that has two steps. One to start up the app and one to perform a basic assertion. In this case, I'm only testing that the original view, or the view that I see when the app starts up, is the home screen by default. Now, obviously, if we had more time, we'd dig a little bit deeper, maybe test how that location listing works. But for now, I just want to give you an idea of how the flow of this works. Mobile testing provides APIs to do various things that you need to test this app. So if we take this Android device, for instance, when I start up the app, I have this Android.launch API, which takes the app's identifier, which in this case is com.telerik.kendo-sushi, and this is actually defined in this .ab project configuration file here. So what I'm doing is I launch the Android app when the test starts. I wait 4,000 milliseconds, give the app a chance to start up. Then I'm going to run this test right here, which all this does is says find the element with an ID of about, and check whether its class list contains this KMView class name. And this is a class name that Kendo UI Mobile applies to the currently displayed view. And that's really all we're doing at this point. And to run these tests, I'm going to head back to the command line, go into my specs folder, or test specs folder, and run tm test. And when I run this, pay attention to my Android device. So tm test finds the agent, or in this case, just my Android device. You'll see that it actually starts the app up, it runs the test, and it reports the results back to the command line. And while this test in this case was relatively basic, the concept here is very powerful. With mobile testing, the Telerik platform lets you run automated tests on iOS, Android, and Windows Phone devices. And these automated tests lets developers find problems with an app before it gets to users. But we're not done quite yet. Even with this automated testing in place, this app still isn't ready for public app stores. We still haven't even implemented everything yet. We had a couple of those screens that were just completely empty. But we might be ready to send this app off to maybe some internal QA staff or maybe even some external beta testers, especially if you're working in an iterative or an agile development environment, where you might want to have this functionality verified before moving on to the next step. Now, this has always been a tricky problem for mobile apps. And this isn't the web where you can configure a password-protected URL of some variety. So what are we going to do here? With that question in mind, I'm going to toss it back to Gabe, who's going to discuss what's next. Gabe?
Thanks, TJ. So now you've seen how the Telerik platform, using App Builder's live sync capabilities, can help you immediately experience the impact of your code. And you've also seen how it lets you stay focused on your users as opposed to infrastructure by letting you quickly spin up new cloud data services. And finally, TJ showed you how mobile testing can protect your progress and your users as your app evolves. So now let's talk about how to launch your mobile app and the value of launching in stages. Now, as a marketer, I can certainly understand the attraction of launching your mobile app with a grand spectacle, but this is not the best place to be validating your ideas. Before you commit the kind of resources it takes to create a grand spectacle, you want to be sure your ideas will work. Which means you'll start small by recruiting a manageable group of early adopters. Now, finding these early adopters and then making them happy, this alone is going to teach you so much. And this learning can later be funneled into your efforts to create a grand spectacle if that's what you want to do. And then once you've assembled this small group of early adopters, you'll ship early and often, not through public app stores, but rather through personal deployments. But to do that, your development process needs to let you establish distinct cohorts of users and then push builds directly to their mobile devices. And then once they're able to interact with your app on their mobile device, you'll need to give them a way to provide feedback about their experience. But this is a lot easier said than done. Typing on tiny screens is difficult, it's frustrating, and generally very error-prone. And there is no way you're going to get users to submit detailed feedback in this setting, which is why we're left with the kind of reviews we typically see in public app stores. Now, it is infuriating to be on the receiving end of a comment like this. There is nothing constructive here, nothing that would even partially suggest why this person is unhappy or what we should do to fix their problem. But this is generally the kind of feedback you're going to get from public app stores. which is why you don't want to be reliant on public App Store reviews to know what your users are thinking. Instead, you need to build feedback directly into your mobile app. And I understand that you'll need details and context for the feedback to be actionable, but we just have to accept that users aren't going to tap in all those details on their smartphone, which means you'll need to find a way to gather any details you need automatically. And finally, you need to measure their activity. Whether they gave you feedback or not, you need to know a lot about what they're trying to do and the kind of experiences they're having. I'm of course talking about adding analytics to your mobile app. Now, historically, mobile apps have been a big black box in this regard. It's been very challenging, if not downright impossible, to find out what users are doing in your app. But there are now solutions to this problem that can give you visibility into what your users are doing and the kind of experiences they're having. So now I'm going to turn the webinar back over to TJ to show us how the Telerik platform can help us deploy our mobile app in stages, get actionable feedback from our users, and then measure their activity. So TJ?
Okay, so now we're ready to get this app in the hands of testers. And for this, the Telerik platform provides Telerik App Manager, which is basically your own private app store for both iOS and Android. Let's look at how we can use App Manager to get the Kendo Sushi app we built in the hands of testers. Now within the Telerik platform, App Manager now appears in this panel on the right-hand side of the screen. So let's go ahead and open it up and add a new app. Now the first thing we need to do is upload the app itself. And luckily we already have that. Whenever you perform a build with a CLI or a build and deploy from Sublime Text, the app itself, or the .ipa for iOS, the .apk for Android, or the .xap for Windows Phone, gets placed in the application's directory structure. So I can navigate to the app, and we'll pick the .apa for iOS, and upload that file. And when we do this, App Manager automatically extracts some information from the app, which is what it's doing now. So we get the app's name, its version, and so forth. Then we can optionally add a description and some screenshots, but we'll leave that blank for now. And finally, we configure the distribution, or who this app is made available to. Now for now, we won't give access to anyone, but we'll come back to this momentarily. I now see that app here with the status of not published. But before we get into publishing this app, we have to configure who we're publishing the app to. So let's go to this users link. Here we can build and manage a list of all the people we would like to have as potential testers of our applications. If we want to add new users, all we need is their email address. They'll receive an invitation to join App Manager. Now, the most powerful aspect of this is once you have these users, you can organize them into groups, and that's what this link is for here. So, for instance, suppose I wanted to separate internal QA staff from external beta testers. So what I can do is add a group for each. So I'll start by adding a QA team, and I'll add myself as well as Rob. Then I'll create another group for my beta testers, and I'll add Jim to that group. To see why this is cool, let's head back to the app that we registered earlier. Now, if I edit this app and head back down to this distribution group, you'll see the groups that we just created are available here. And for each, I can control which of these groups can install this app. Now, in this case, my Kendo Sushi app isn't quite ready for external eyes, so I'm going to pick just QA users. And now that I have the app configured, I want to push it out. So I'm going to click this and click the Publish button. Now, users of App Manager interact with the product through an app on their iOS or Android device. So if I bring up my iPhone here, you can see the App Manager app here. Now remember that I published this app to the QA group and that I myself was a member of that group. So when I open the App Manager app, we'll see the Kendo Sushi app listed. I can open this app up, I'll see its icon. If I would have added a description or screenshots, I would have seen this here. I can optionally rate this app, but most importantly, I can download and install this app to my device. As a tester, I can now play around with this app and give feedback. And importantly, I can do all of this before the app appears in public app stores. And to make that feedback process even easier, the Telerik platform now provides app feedback. And I want to show what this new app feedback project is, so I'm going to start by going back into the Telerik platform. Now earlier I created an app feedback project for the Kendo Sushi app, and that's what you're seeing here. Now, there is no feedback yet, so there's nothing to see here quite yet. App Feedback itself is nothing more than a Cordova plugin that has an API you can use to collect feedback from users. Now, during Gabe's segment, I went ahead and added the plugin to our Kendo Sushi project. So I'll switch back here. Now, specifically, I added the plugin in the project's .ab project file, and I added a Kendo modal view that I'm going to use to collect the feedback in. Now, App Feedback takes care of collecting and aggregating feedback, but it doesn't dictate how you do it. So in this case, I'm using this Kendo modal dialog along with a little utility that detects shake events on mobile devices. So basically how this works is anytime the user shakes their device, I'm going to open this modal dialog and present the user a form in which they can provide feedback. To see what this looks like on a device, let's head back to my iPhone. And I'm going to switch to the locations page, and you won't be able to see this, but I'm going to go ahead and shake this device, which shows this form in the modal dialog. And from here I can leave feedback. In this case, I'll say it would be really nice if this listing would actually show the phone numbers of the locations. I'll submit that, and I get an alert thanking me for my feedback. So let's head back to the platform to see what this actually looks like. Now, if I go into this project now, sure enough, I can see the feedback that I just added. Now check out some of the things that App Feedback did for me automatically. First, you'll see that App Feedback took a screenshot of this device at the moment I provided feedback. Now, the second thing it did is it also collected some system information about my device. So it knew that I was using an iPhone 5, it collected my OS version, and even the dimensions of my device. And all of this information is really going to help when I go back to decipher this feedback, especially when users report bugs. In the grand scheme of things, what we've developed today has been relatively basic. I mean, we have one piece of functionality complete for the location listing, but Kendo Sushi is probably going to want a completely functional app before they're interested in taking this app to, say, a public app store. But when they are ready, the platform does have the tools you need to do that. And it's important that the feedback cycle that we've been talking about throughout this webinar doesn't end the second that that app hits the stores. Which brings us to the last of the Telerik platform projects, Telerik Analytics. Using Telerik Analytics in an app builder project is somewhat similar to App Feedback. Really, all you need to do is add the plugin in the .ab project file, add a short script that you can download from the Telerik platform, and then call a start function when you want to start the tracking. There's a roughly 5-minute delay between calling the plugin and data actually showing up in the platform, but I can show you some of the data that I've gathered from testing this project over the last few weeks. Here's the analytics project, and here's some of my data. You can see some quick data about the project, things like users per day, trending information. You can place users on the map. If you develop cross-platform apps, you can see which platforms users are actually using your app on, Android, iOS, Windows Phone. And these are just the basics, so you can also track features in your app. For instance, Kendo Sushi might want to know how many people visit the app's location tab. You can also time how long users spend on given features. And you can even track exceptions with Telerik Analytics, so you know when your app isn't working instantly. But all of this is about continuing that feedback loop. We did this way back when we created prototypes with App Prototyper. We continued this during development, and Telerik Analytics just continues this process after we send the app into the wild. Now hopefully you've seen how the tools in the Telerik platform can help you with the entire software development lifecycle for mobile applications. If you're interested in the code for this sample application, it's available at GitHub at github.com/tjvantol/kendo-sushi. And again, my name is TJ Vantol. I'm at TJ Vantol on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions. But for now, I'm going to send it back to Gabe.
Thanks, TJ. So now you've seen 7 steps that you can use to deploy a successful mobile app, and you've seen how the Telerik platform helps with each of those steps. So now let's quickly review. Step 1, create a disposable implementation of your idea. By using wireframes, mockups, and prototypes, we can quickly iterate through our ideas. What we're doing at this stage is scouting for the right thing to build and testing our assumptions along the way. And by keeping our implementations disposable, we're avoiding overcommitting to a bad path. Step 2, set up a development process that makes the impact obvious. Your development process needs to let you write some code and then immediately experience the impact of that code across devices. Ultimately, you want to draw a clear line between action and result because this lets you be more efficient in everything you do. Step 3. Stay focused on your users, not your infrastructure. Although mobile is very important, it's also relatively new, and you can burn a lot of time trying to assemble your own mobile development platform. As you progress, try to stay focused on the activities that have a clear and positive impact for your users, and consider using tools that can help you maintain that focus. Step 4. Use automation to protect your gains. As apps evolve, things accidentally break. It happens. And as we engage with more and more devices, it's really easy to not even be aware that you broke something. Use automated functional testing to continuously check the health and wellness of the features in your app across multiple devices. Step 5. Launch your mobile app in stages. We're not burning our apps to CDs or disks anymore, so shipping doesn't need to happen in one place or time. Use this to your advantage by recruiting groups of users and testing your app early and often by deploying outside public app stores. Step 6. Give your users an easy way to provide actionable feedback. You do not want to be reliant on public app store reviews to know what your users are thinking. So give your users a way to provide feedback from inside your app, but also realize that they aren't going to give you a lot of details in that format. So look for ways to gather those details automatically so that the feedback you get is actionable. And finally, step 7, measure activity, watch, listen, learn, and repeat. Whether they send feedback or not, you need to know what kind of experiences your users are having. You'll do this through analytics, and by measuring their activity, you'll gain insights that can be funneled into your next iteration. So these are the 7 steps that you can use to deploy a successful mobile app. And just remember, this is a continuous process of listening and adapting and doing that through every stage of the project. It's this process, not mere chance, that enables us to create a successful mobile app. And by successful, we mean an app that offers users an exceptional experience. And now you've seen how the Telerik platform can help with this by offering tools and services that help you listen and adapt across the entire lifecycle of your project. And now we invite you to give it a look for yourself by visiting platform.telerik.com. You'll be able to try everything the Telerik platform contains for free for 30 days, and then after that we have several flexible tiers of service to choose from. And on that note, I have some very exciting news. We're making changes to our Telerik platform pricing this week. We're introducing a brand new tier, the developer tier, which is available for only $39 a month. This new tier will include all of the IDE options that TJ shared earlier. This includes Sublime text integration, which TJ has been using throughout this webinar, but also includes our Visual Studio integration, our desktop client, our web client, as well as our CLI. All of these will be available to you. So now, more than ever, you get to embrace the tools you love, and the Telerik platform will enhance those tools with best-in-class mobile development capabilities. Now, we're always listening, so if you have any feedback or suggestions, do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can email me at sumner@telerik.com or find me on Twitter at GabeSumner. And that's it. We will now transition to our live Q&A format, but for those of you that must leave, thank you once again for joining us today. We cannot wait to see the experiences you create with the Telerik platform. For everyone else, there will be a brief pause as the Q&A session begins. Log those questions in and we'll start answering them very shortly.